Exam technique for Professional 2 Strategic Performance Management, or P2 SPM. This webinar will give some insights into how best to approach the P2 SPM paper of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Now, of course, anyone who's sitting this paper has already got a successful record behind them in sitting and passing the earlier stages of the Institute exams. But P2 SPM is a very different type of exam paper than the papers encountered at earlier stages. There are major differences both in the type of question asked and in the type of answer that the examiner is looking for. Also, the fact that the P2 SPM paper is open book creates particular challenges for exam candidates. Candidates can give themselves a better chance of success in this particular exam if they recognize these differences and prepare themselves accordingly. First of all, some observations about the format of the paper. The paper is designed around a case study. The introduction to the case is typically given on the first page of the exam paper and is fairly short, typically about 500 words. It's a good idea to begin by reading this introduction to the case quite thoroughly. It's short enough for the reader to be able to absorb it, but it also gives a strong flavour of the strategic choices and problems facing the organisation in question. And then these strategic choices and problems are addressed in the questions which make up the rest of the paper. Always there are 5 questions about the case. All the questions are compulsory. Each question carries between 15 and 25 marks, and typically each question is divided into 2 parts. Each question begins by giving some additional information about some particular aspect of the case. And therefore, in order to answer any question properly, the candidate needs to draw on the information provided in the introduction at the start of the paper, and also on the specific information which is given at the beginning of each question. In general, therefore, I describe the format of the paper as a loosely stitched case study. A more conventional case study paper would present all of the information at the beginning, with no hint as to which information is relevant to which individual question. But I think the loosely stitched structure is designed to make life a little bit easier for candidates by giving at least some indication as to which information is relevant to each question. The questions in the paper are not highly directional in nature. In other words, the examiners typically don't explicitly state what they were looking for. This is one of the most challenging aspects of the paper, and it's appropriate and necessary for an exam paper at this advanced level. For example, the syllabus indicates that the paper will require candidates to select as well as apply strategic performance management techniques. And this level of competency is essential for the professionally qualified accountant. This is because, for example, clients or managers don't specify the calculations which they would like the accountant to perform. Instead, a client or manager will define a business problem in broad strategic terms, and it's then up to the accountant to determine the most appropriate means of addressing that problem. Let's look now at an example of the kind of question which is typical of the P2 SPM paper. The particular example I've chosen is question 4 from the April 2011 paper. The case study in that paper was Healthcare Foods Limited, or HCF, which had a successful track record in manufacturing and distributing food products for customers with special dietary needs. Now, typically, a case study of a successful company like HCF is a bit more difficult to analyse than a case study of an unsuccessful company. This is because in a successful company, the strategic areas and problems needing attention are less obvious and are harder to identify. Now, having said that, it was clear from the case study provided at the start of this paper that the chief executive of HCF was concerned to identify the source and nature of future competitive threats. The specific introduction to question 4 provided information about 5 different pricing strategies. HCF might use one or several of these pricing strategies in managing the competitive threat. Now, the question asked in this case was quite specific. Candidates were asked to assess the appropriateness of these pricing strategies for this particular company in its particular situation. To answer the question properly, candidates needed to pay close attention to the nature of HCF's products and its distinctive competitive situation. Therefore, it's essential to use all of the information provided about the company and perhaps even to engage in a little bit of speculation. It's worth investing some time in planning your answer, perhaps in the form of a rough work note, before you begin writing your full answer. As you plan your answer, ask yourself whether what you are planning to write will really answer the question which has been asked. For example, just writing about the merits or demerits of each pricing strategy in a vacuum, instead of writing about the use of these strategies by HCF, wouldn't answer the question which was asked in this example. Every question in P2 SPM is different and unstructured as compared with previous papers. And this is one of the particular challenges of the paper. Candidates are tested on their ability to select and apply their knowledge, and this can make the exam quite a stressful experience. But it is possible to identify some common rules as to what makes a good answer. First of all, strategic and long-term implications are of primary importance. For example, in the question on pricing strategy, the appropriateness of each strategy would depend on its ability to help the organization build and defend its market share. For example, by having the effect of discouraging competitors from entering the market. Any short-term considerations, such as maximizing profits in the current year, would be of much less importance and shouldn't be the main focus of your answer. Secondly, competitor action and reaction is always an endogenous variable in strategic decision making. And what that means is that a competitive threat simply cannot be permanently solved or permanently eliminated. The best that can be done is to temporarily keep the problem at bay, so that we always need to think ahead as to what we will do when that temporary solution is no longer effective. For example, a strategy for building up customer loyalty to products might involve patenting of products, and this could be highly effective in the short to medium term. But even as we're taking out those patents, we need to recognize their limited legal lifespan and recognize that after patents expire, the only way to retain customer loyalty may be to provide an objectively superior product and customer service experience. So this type of multi-period strategic thinking needs to be evident in your answer. Thirdly, in addressing strategic problems, uncertainty and contingencies can't just be assumed away. Now, by contrast, in purely short-term decision-making, we often resolve uncertainty using a technique such as expected value, and we don't make any explicit plans for anything other than the average outcome or most likely outcome occurring. Now, this expected value approach is acceptable given the fairly small scale of short-term decisions. But by contrast, one of the things that distinguishes strategic decisions is the sheer size of their impact, especially since they are often not easy to reverse. For example, a decision to discontinue some major product ranges can't easily be reversed because competitors would move in quickly to fill the vacuum in the market. So the role of strategic analysis is to reduce the degree of uncertainty facing the decision maker in the situation, but not to pretend that the uncertainty doesn't exist. As an example of that, an activity-based cost analysis or a segmental analysis could help to identify the costs associated with serving particular market segments. Finally, on this slide, in a strategic performance management context, management accounting shouldn't be seen just as a set of calculation techniques and control mechanisms. There's always a danger that with all of our technical knowledge of accounting, from activity-based costing to residual income to the balanced scorecard, we will just treat all of these techniques as if they were answers in search of problems. In order to identify the solution to a problem in strategic performance management, the most basic requirement is for the accountant to empathize with the particular situation in which the business finds itself. The accountant must be a business person first and an accountant second. Accounting calculations and techniques should only be applied to the situation if it can be shown that they are a suitable approach to the particular problem facing the business. Only certain verbs will be used in the requirements paragraphs of the questions of the P2 SPM paper. And these particular verbs are what educationalists call level 9 verbs, and several examples of them are shown in this table. Verbs such as critically assess, evaluate, and suggest options. It's worth paying close attention to the verb used because it provides an indication of the form of analysis which the examiner expects from you. For example, if you're asked to suggest options for how the threat of a specific new competitor could be addressed, then you must do exactly that. In other words, you must identify several potential ways of addressing the threat. There are certain verbs which typically would not be used in the requirements paragraphs of the questions of the P2 SPM paper. Verbs such as summarize or calculate. The reason for this is that a direct instruction to calculate or summarize something would be just too simple a task given the standard of professional competence which candidates are expected to demonstrate in an exam at this level. On this final slide, I want to identify some errors of approach which are commonly made in answering this paper. Obviously, you should plan to avoid these. First of all, pretending that the verb was discuss, explain, summarize, or calculate. The reason that examiners use particular verbs and avoid using others is to communicate to candidates what form of analysis is required. So it's important that candidates should respond accordingly in order to get the maximum marks. Secondly, ignoring the information provided in the case. For example, the question which we talked about earlier, the strategic pricing one, from the April 2011 paper, involved assessing the appropriateness of pricing strategies for a particular company in a particular situation. A candidate who ignored the context, perhaps by appraising strategies in a theoretical manner without reference to the company's specific situation, wouldn't be answering the question which was asked. Thirdly, writing down material which was, or which could have been, taken straight from a textbook. P2 SPM is an open book exam, and the reason for this is that all of the questions involve candidates being required to apply their knowledge to a previously unseen case. The examiner won't give you any marks at all, just for transcribing material which you may have in front of you in the exam. Fourthly, lack of rigour in critical evaluation. Bear in mind that you may be writing a report for which a client would be expected to pay money or to use as the basis of an important business decision. The report must therefore have substantive content and be rigorously argued. Fifthly, deficiencies in technical skills. Excellent technical skills are necessary for performing well in this paper, though of course they are not sufficient in themselves. It's disappointingly common, however, to see candidates unable to properly conduct things such as advanced variance analysis or activity-based cost analysis. And finally, inappropriate writing style. Business communications requires the use of suitably formal and clear language. Informal expressions should be avoided just because they are inappropriate. And just as importantly, clichés or jargon should be avoided because they create the negative impression that your answer lacks rigour or substantive content.